The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with the quiet hum of machines and muffled voices. In the cramped hospital room, Sarah lay in bed, her face flushed with the glow of new motherhood. Her heart raced as she cradled the small bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket, the warmth of her son, Marcus, radiating against her chest. He was finally here. A tiny, perfect being that she had carried for 9 long months, and every second of discomfort had been worth it. Across the room, David stood with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He was tall and lean, with sharp features that had once drawn Sarah to him. But now, as he looked at their son, his smile felt strained, almost forced. The joy on Sarah's face felt like a beacon, but David's heart was a storm of conflicting emotions. He had always wanted a family, but now that it was real, he couldn't shake the anxiety that churned within him. "Look at him, David," Sarah exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. "He's beautiful. Just look at those tiny fingers." She gently touched Marcus's hand, her eyes sparkling with love. David forced a smile, but his gaze drifted to the window, where the sunlight spilled in, illuminating the room. "Yeah, he is something," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. As Sarah cooed over their son, David felt the walls of the hospital room closing in on him. A weight pressed on his chest, and he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled there ever since they had learned Marcus would be of mixed race. The idea of having a child with a different skin tone than his own was something he had never fully confronted, and now it loomed over him like a dark cloud. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. She looked up at him, concern etching her brow. "Of course," David replied too quickly, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Just tired, I guess. Maybe you should sit down. You've been on your feet for hours," she suggested, her voice soothing, but David shook his head. "I'm fine. Just taking it all in," he said, turning his attention back to the baby. As he gazed at Marcus, a flicker of anxiety sparked within him again. What would the world be like for his son? Would he be safe? Would he be accepted? These thoughts spiraled into a deeper fear, a fear that he had never admitted to anyone, not even to himself. The door creaked open, and a nurse entered, her smile brightening the room. She was black, with kind eyes and a warm demeanor. "Good morning, you two. How are we feeling today?" she asked, moving to check on Sarah and Marcus. David felt a jolt of discomfort at the sight of her. He shifted in place, his jaw clenched. Why did it bother him so much? He had never considered himself prejudiced, yet here he was, feeling an unsettling tension bubble up inside him. "Just perfect," Sarah replied, her face lighting up at the nurse's presence. "I can't believe he's finally here." "That's wonderful to hear. You're doing such a great job, Sarah. And look at him, he's absolutely precious," the nurse said, beaming at the baby. David's smile faltered, and he took a step back, leaning against the wall. He felt like an outsider in this moment, like he was watching a scene unfold that he didn't quite belong to. The nurse's laughter mingled with Sarah's, and for a moment, he felt a pang of jealousy. Why couldn't he share in that joy? Why did he feel so distant, even from the woman he loved? As the nurse continued to fuss over Marcus, David's mind raced with thoughts he could barely comprehend. He felt as if he were being pulled in 2 directions. One toward the love and happiness that Sarah radiated, and the other toward a fear that was rooted deep within him, a fear he had inherited from his upbringing. Later that evening, in the dim light of the hospital room, David sat in a chair by the window, arms crossed tightly against his chest. The nurse had left, and the soft sounds of the night filled the room. Sarah was dozing lightly, her head resting against the pillow, a peaceful smile still gracing her lips. As he watched her, David's mind drifted back to his own childhood, a life filled with whispered prejudices and carefully taught biases. His parents had never been overtly racist, but the subtle remarks, the casual jokes about people who looked different, had etched themselves into his subconscious. He had thought he had escaped that life, but now, as he contemplated the future of his son, he realized how deeply those lessons had rooted themselves in him. "David!" Sarah's voice broke through his reverie, and he looked over to see her stirring awake. "Are you still there?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice quieter than he intended. "Everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing in concern again. "Just thinking," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "About what?" she pressed gently. "About us. About Marcus. I just want everything to be perfect for him," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It will be," she assured him, her eyes softening. "We'll make sure of it. He'll be loved and cared for. That's all that matters. Right?" he said, though his heart felt heavy. The weight of his unspoken fears pressed down on him. But what if things aren't easy for him? "Life isn't easy for anyone," she replied, her tone firm but compassionate. "But we can give him the tools to navigate it. Love, support, resilience. Those are what matter most." David's silence spoke volumes as he stared out into the night. He wanted to believe her, but the deep-seated fears lingered, gnawing at him. "What if—" "David," she interrupted, her voice sharper now. "You need to stop with the what-ifs. We can't predict the future. Let's focus on this moment. We have a beautiful son, and we're a family." But as Sarah spoke, David felt a chasm opening between them, one that he couldn't quite comprehend. The fears and prejudices he had harbored for so long were bubbling to the surface, threatening to rupture the fragile bond they had built. Weeks passed, and the hospital room became a distant memory, yet the unease remained. David found himself becoming more withdrawn, his interactions with Sarah tinged with tension. He could feel her frustration growing, and it only served to amplify the chaos within him. He wanted to be the supportive husband she needed, but he was grappling with something he couldn't articulate, the very essence of his identity and the fear of what it meant to be a father to a child who looked different from him. One evening, after a particularly tense day, David could no longer contain the turmoil that had been brewing inside him. As they sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken words, he finally burst. "Sarah, I can't do this." Her eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" "I mean, everything. I'm scared. I don't know how to raise him. I don't know how to be his father." The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. "But you love him," she exclaimed, her voice laced with disbelief. "You love him, David. It's not that simple," he shouted, the frustration boiling over. "I can't ignore what people will think. What if they see him and think what? That he's not worth loving? That he doesn't deserve a father?" Her eyes blazed with passion. "You're letting your fears dictate your actions. This is our son." I know, he cried, running a hand through his hair in desperation. "But I don't know how to change. I don't know how to face the world with him. Then we'll face it together. But you can't just walk away. You can't abandon him like you're thinking of abandoning me." David's breath hitched, and he felt the weight of her words sink in. The idea of leaving, of walking away from the life they had built, became a tangible possibility in his mind. He couldn't bear to confront the truth of his feelings, the prejudice that had been ingrained in him since childhood. I can't do this," he whispered, the realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. Without another word, David turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah standing there, heartbroken and bewildered. The door clicked shut behind him, and in that moment, he felt as if he were stepping off a precipice, plunging into the unknown. The weight of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders, and he knew that the decision he had made would reverberate through their lives for years to come. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the small town that had witnessed Sarah's transformation from a hopeful mother to a resilient single parent. With Marcus now a toddler, she faced the daunting reality of raising him alone. The financial burdens weighed heavily on her shoulders, and the whispers of judgment from the community stung like a swarm of bees. As she pushed the stroller down the tree-lined street, she could feel the stares of the neighbors, their eyes judging her every move. "Look at her," she overheard one woman say to her friend as they stood on a porch, arms crossed. "What kind of woman raises a child without a father?" Sarah took a deep breath, tightening her grip on the stroller's handle. She refused to let their words sink in, but the ache in her chest was undeniable. She had fought through the initial shock of David's departure, but the loneliness often echoed louder than the laughter of Marcus, who was blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding them. One afternoon, while sitting in the community center during a support group for single parents, Sarah found a semblance of solace. The room buzzed with shared experiences and laughter, a sanctuary from the outside world where she could shed her worries, even if just for a moment. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Every day is a struggle, and I don't know if I'm doing this right." A woman named Linda, sitting across from her, reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're doing better than you think, Sarah. Look at Marcus. He's a bright light. That's all because of you." "Thank you, Linda," Sarah replied, a small smile breaking through her concerns. "I just wish I didn't have to do it alone." As they continued sharing their stories, Sarah realized she was not alone in her struggles. The room was filled with mothers and fathers who had faced abandonment, loss, and hardship, yet they were all striving to provide love and support to their children. Their resilience inspired her, igniting a fire within her own heart. Later that week, Sarah found herself at the local grocery store, balancing Marcus on her hip as she pushed the cart down the aisles. She spotted a familiar face, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had been a neighbor for years. Sarah had always admired her kindness, but lately, even Mrs. Thompson's warm smile felt tainted by the gossip swirling around town. "Hello there, Sarah," Mrs. Thompson called out, her voice cheerful. "And who do we have here?" "This is Marcus," Sarah replied, her voice brightening. "He's getting so big. Look at those big eyes," Mrs. Thompson cooed, reaching out to ruffle Marcus's curly hair. "You take such good care of him." "Thank you," Sarah said, feeling a flicker of warmth in the woman's praise. "It's not always easy, but he gives me strength." As the conversation continued, Sarah felt a sense of belonging. Mrs. Thompson shared stories of her own struggles raising children, and the two women bonded over their experiences. For the first time in a while, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps she could navigate this journey successfully. In the weeks that followed, the support from her community grew stronger. Neighbors began to offer help, whether it was babysitting Marcus for an afternoon or bringing over meals. Sarah learned to accept their kindness, realizing it was okay to lean on others when the weight felt too heavy to bear alone. Meanwhile, flashbacks of David's childhood began to weave their way into the narrative of Sarah's life. David had grown up in a household where racial prejudice was the norm, his father a staunch believer in the superiority of their lineage. The lessons ingrained in him were insidious, shaping his worldview and leaving scars that festered over time. In one vivid memory, young David sat at the dinner table, his small hands gripping the edge as his father launched into a tirade about those people. "We don't associate with them, David," he had said sternly, his voice low but intense. "They're not like us. You must remember that." David's mother, silent as always, simply nodded along, her own eyes downcast. The fear in her face only reinforced the message. David absorbed the words, locking them away in the recesses of his mind, unaware of how they would later dictate his actions. As the years slipped by, Sarah continued to raise Marcus with love and intention, often reflecting on the values she wished to instill in him. She spoke openly about acceptance, kindness, and the importance of understanding others, regardless of their background or skin color. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched him grow into a thoughtful and compassionate young man. On the eve of Marcus's high school graduation, Sarah stood in the living room, surrounded by stacks of art supplies and scattered sketches. She had been organizing his portfolio for the upcoming exhibition, a milestone she knew would be monumental for him. "Mom, can you help me with this one?" Marcus called, his voice brimming with excitement. He held up a canvas showcasing a vibrant landscape, colors dancing across the fabric. "Of course, sweetheart. It's stunning," she replied, stepping closer to admire his work. "You've really captured the essence of the place." "Thanks. I want to make sure it's perfect for the show," he said, a hint of nervousness creeping into his tone. What if no one likes it? Marcus, you have a gift. Just be true to yourself, and the rest will follow, Sarah encouraged, her heart swelling with pride and a touch of sadness. She remembered the struggles of his early years, the weight of societal judgment, and how far they had come. As the day of the exhibition approached, anticipation filled the air. Sarah could hardly contain her excitement, but a flicker of worry lingered in her mind. What if David showed up? She had never shared the details of his departure with Marcus, wanting to shield him from the pain of his father's choices. But now, with his art on display for the world to see, the possibility of their paths crossing hung heavy in the air. The night of the exhibition arrived, and Sarah stood by the entrance, her heart racing as guests began to file in. The gallery buzzed with energy, and Marcus's artwork adorned the walls, each piece a testament to his talent and unique perspective. Look, Mom, they're loving it, Marcus exclaimed, his face lighting up as a group of admirers gathered around one of his paintings. Sarah watched with tears in her eyes, filled with pride for the remarkable young man he had become. She caught snippets of conversations, people marveling at his ability to convey emotion through color and form. It was in that moment she realized that despite the struggles, they had created a life rich with love and resilience. As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of the past loomed ever closer. She spotted familiar faces, friends from the community who had supported her, and for a moment, she felt safe. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't ignore the nagging thought of David's potential arrival. Mom, can you believe it? Some of the critics are coming. Marcus beamed, pulling her from her thoughts. I can't believe how far you've come, Sarah replied, her voice filled with warmth. You deserve every bit of this. Just as she began to relax, the gallery doors swung open, and in walked a man she hadn't seen in 20 years. David stood there, his face a mixture of confusion and awe, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Marcus. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she felt the weight of the moment press upon her. Who is that? Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible, but Sarah could hear the tremor of uncertainty. That's your father, she finally said, her heart racing as she grappled with the truth she had kept hidden for so long. The air thickened with tension, and the past, once buried, surged to the surface in an unstoppable tide. In the bustling atmosphere of the art gallery, vibrant colors danced across the walls, each painting a testament to Marcus's talent. The opening night of his exhibit drew a crowd that buzzed with admiration and curiosity. Among them stood Sarah, her heart swelling with pride as she caught sight of her son. He moved gracefully from group to group, his presence magnetic, drawing in attention from art enthusiasts and critics alike. Look at him, Sarah whispered to herself, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He's come so far. A well-dressed art critic approached Marcus, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Your work is phenomenal, truly. You have a unique voice that speaks volumes. What inspires you? He asked, his notepad ready to capture every word. Marcus, with his signature humility, smiled warmly. Thank you. I find inspiration in my experiences, my upbringing. There's a lot of beauty and struggle, you know? The critic nodded, jotting down notes. It's refreshing to see an artist embrace their personal narrative so openly. It adds depth to your work. Have you thought about the stories behind each piece? Absolutely. Each painting reflects a part of my life, my journey, Marcus replied, his passion evident. I want people to connect with my story, to see that art can be a bridge between different experiences. As the conversation continued, Sarah listened intently, her heart aching with a mix of pride and sorrow. She knew that Marcus had forged his identity far away from the shadow of his father, David. The pain of abandonment lingered in the corners of her mind, but she had always chosen to focus on the love and resilience she instilled in her son. Suddenly, the critic's voice cut through her thoughts. I can see you've poured your heart into this exhibit. It's a celebration of life itself. Thank you, Marcus said, glancing around the room, his eyes searching for his mother. When their gazes met, he beamed, a boyish grin lighting up his face. "Mom, come here." Sarah approached, her heart racing. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Come meet the critic who thinks my work is good enough to change the world," he said, a playful glimmer in his eyes. As they stood together, Marcus introduced her. "This is my mom, Sarah. I wouldn't be here without her support." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Green," the critic said, extending his hand. "Your son is truly remarkable." "Thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Marcus has always had a gift. After exchanging pleasantries, Sarah stepped back, allowing Marcus to continue engaging with the critic. She watched him with a sense of bittersweet nostalgia, remembering the countless nights spent nurturing his dreams. But amidst her pride, a shadow loomed: David's absence. Marcus had grown up without knowing the man who had walked away, a gap Sarah had tried her best to fill. Meanwhile, across town, David sat in his spacious office, the walls adorned with accolades and awards that spoke to his success in the business world. Yet, despite the trophies and recognition, an emptiness gnawed at him. He flipped through a newspaper, the pages crinkling under his fingers, until an article caught his eye, an announcement about Marcus's art exhibit. The headline read, "Local Artist Shines at Debut Exhibit, a Journey of Resilience and Identity." His breath hitched in his throat. The boy he had abandoned was now a man, celebrated for his talent. Regret washed over him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in remorse. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decisions pressing heavily on his chest. "What have I done?" he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "I could have been there for him." David tried to shove the thoughts aside, focusing instead on his work. Yet, as the hours wore on, the feelings of longing and regret crept back in. He had built a life filled with achievements, but at what cost? He thought of Sarah and Marcus, the life he had abandoned, and the love he had rejected. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he whispered to himself, but deep down, he knew that was a lie. Back at the gallery, the atmosphere was electric. Marcus moved with ease, his laughter echoing in the air as he spoke with friends and admirers. But then a woman caught his eye. She stood slightly apart from the crowd, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that felt both familiar and unsettling. Her dark hair framed her face beautifully, and he noticed the way her expression shifted. Curiosity mixed with something deeper. "Excuse me, I'll be right back," Marcus said to a group of admirers, making his way toward the woman. "Can I help you with something?" She smiled softly, her eyes glimmering with recognition. "I just wanted to say how much I admire your work. There's a raw honesty in it that's rare," she said, her voice steady yet gentle. "Thank you. That means a lot," Marcus replied, intrigued. "I'm always trying to find ways to express my experiences through my art." "I can see that," she said, her gaze lingering on him. "You have a very unique style. It reflects strength and vulnerability at the same time." "Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. It's a bit of a balancing act." "Really?" he chuckled, feeling a connection with her that he couldn't quite place. As they spoke, Marcus felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle that belonged together. "What's your name?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Olivia," she replied, her smile widening slightly. "I've been following your work for a while now. It's amazing to see it in person." "Thank you, Olivia. That really means a lot," he said, studying her features. "Do you have an interest in art?" "Yes, I've always been fascinated by it. I'm actually a curator," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "I work with a few galleries in the area." "Wow, that's incredible," Marcus exclaimed, impressed. "Maybe we could collaborate sometime?" "I'd love that," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "But there's something else I wanted to ask you about." "What is it?" Marcus inquired, sensing a shift in her tone. Olivia hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "Have you ever wondered about your past? About where you come from?" Marcus felt a slight tightening in his chest. I mean, I know my mother's story. She raised me alone, and she's my biggest inspiration," he said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "I meant more about your father," she said softly, her gaze unwavering. "There's a lot of untold stories there, isn't there?" Marcus's expression faltered, memories of his mother's vague mentions of his father surfacing in his mind. "I don't really think about him much. He left before I could even remember," he said, his voice strained. Olivia nodded, her eyes filled with an understanding that made him uneasy. Sometimes, it helps to explore those questions, even if the answers are complicated. "Why do you ask?" he pressed, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "It's just, sometimes people come back into our lives when we least expect it," Olivia said, her tone cryptic yet sincere. "And sometimes, those connections can help us understand ourselves better." Marcus felt an inexplicable tug at his heart, a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. "I appreciate your concern, but I've built my life around what I know. I'm okay with that." "Of course," Olivia replied, her voice soothing. "Just remember, the past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. You have the power to write your own story." As they spoke, the gallery buzzed around them, art and laughter mingling in the air. Yet, for Marcus, the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, the weight of her words hanging in the air like an unfinished melody. In that moment, he felt a connection that transcended mere acquaintance, but the depth of her knowledge about his past unsettled him. He couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was more than just a curator. She was a bridge to a past he had never fully acknowledged. And as the night wore on, he couldn't help but wonder how deep those connections ran and what secrets lay waiting to be uncovered. The gallery buzzed with energy as the last remnants of the crowd filtered out, leaving behind whispers of admiration and the scent of freshly uncorked wine. Marcus stood amidst the fading echoes of applause, his heart still racing from the success of his exhibit. He had poured his soul into each piece, but amidst the accolades, a haunting feeling lingered, a sense of unfinished business. Just as he started to gather his thoughts, a soft voice broke through the remnants of excitement. "Your work is extraordinary," Olivia said, stepping forward from the shadows of the gallery. Her dark hair framed her face, and her deep brown eyes sparkled with sincerity. "I can't help but feel a connection to what you create." Marcus turned to face her, his curiosity piqued. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady but curious. "You seem to know more about art than most people here. Are you an artist yourself?" Olivia chuckled gently, shaking her head. "No, not an artist. I've always admired creativity from afar. But your work, it speaks to me in ways I can't explain." She hesitated, then added, "There's a depth in your pieces, a story waiting to be told. I wonder, have you ever thought about your father?" The abruptness of the question made Marcus stiffen. His father was a ghost in his life, a shadow that loomed over his childhood but never fully materialized. "Not really," he replied, his tone neutral. "I mean, I know he walked out when I was born. I guess I've just learned to live without that part of my life." Olivia studied him closely. "You're strong to carry that burden. Most people would feel the need to search for answers, to understand why they were abandoned." "Why would I?" Marcus countered, his voice rising slightly. "He made his choice. I have no intention of chasing after someone who didn't want me." "I understand," she said softly, her gaze unwavering. "But what if I told you there's more to the story? What if your father had his reasons?" The words hung heavily in the air, and Marcus felt a flicker of anger mixed with intrigue. "What do you know about my father?" he demanded, his voice now edged with tension. Olivia took a step back, sensing the shift in his demeanor. I know he's not just a villain in this story. I've been learning about him for years, trying to piece together his life and the choices he made. He's not the monster you might think he is." "Then what is he?" Marcus shot back, crossing his arms defensively. "A coward? A man who ran away when things got tough. Maybe he was just scared," Olivia replied, her voice low but steady. "Sometimes, Fear can drive us to make choices we regret for the rest of our lives. I've seen it happen before. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked, his mind racing. What do you want from me? I want you to understand, she said earnestly. I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Your father, he's struggling too in his own way, and he's been searching for a way to reconnect with you. Marcus felt a rush of emotions. Anger, confusion, and a strange sense of hope. You can't know that. You don't know him. You don't know what he did to my mother or how his choices affected my life. True, she acknowledged, her eyes softening. But I also know he's been watching from a distance, wrestling with his decisions. I think he regrets leaving you and your mother, and I think he would want to make things right if he could. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. How do you know all this? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Olivia hesitated, her gaze drifting momentarily. Because he's my brother, she finally confessed, her voice barely audible. David is my brother. Stunned silence enveloped them like a heavy fog. Marcus's heart raced, and he could feel the walls of his carefully built defenses starting to crumble. You're lying, he said, disbelief etched on his face. I wish I were, Olivia replied, her tone sincere. I've spent years trying to understand him and what led to his choices. I never knew about you until I saw your work in the paper. Your art spoke to me, and I felt an undeniable pull to reach out. Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Why didn't he ever try to find me? He asked, his voice cracking. She took a deep breath, her expression pained. He was afraid of facing the consequences of his actions, afraid of the pain he caused. He thought it was better to stay away, but I don't think he realized the depth of the hurt he left behind. As Marcus processed this revelation, Sarah stood a few feet away, her heart racing as she overheard their conversation. She felt an icy grip of concern mixed with curiosity. Who was this woman, and how did she know such intimate details about David? Marcus? She called, stepping forward, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. Can we talk? Marcus turned, the confusion evident on his face. Mom, I need a minute. No, you need to listen, Sarah insisted, her eyes darting between Marcus and Olivia. This is important. Olivia took a step back, sensing the tension rising. I can leave if you'd prefer, she said, her tone respectful. No, stay, Marcus replied, his mind racing. I need to know what's going on. Sarah's heart raced as she faced her son. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Your father and we had our problems, but I never wanted to keep you from the truth. I just didn't want you to be hurt by the past. What past? Marcus asked, frustration evident. What else is there to know? Dad chose to leave us. Did he? Sarah's voice wavered. Or did he feel he had no other choice? I never told you everything because I wanted to protect you from the pain. Protect me? Marcus echoed, incredulous. From what? The reality that he didn't want me? That I'm a mistake? No, Sarah replied, tears brimming in her eyes. You were never a mistake. But David was raised in a world of prejudice and fear. He was never taught how to cope with his emotions or how to love unconditionally. Why are you defending him? Marcus asked, feeling betrayed. I'm not defending him, Sarah said, her voice rising. I'm trying to help you understand the man who made those choices. He was flawed, yes, but he loved you in his own way. Loved me? Marcus scoffed. He didn't even want to be there when I was born. As the exchange grew heated, Olivia stood quietly, witnessing the emotional turmoil unfold before her. She sensed the raw pain and unresolved feelings swirling around them, and she felt compelled to intervene. Marcus, she said gently, I know this is difficult to hear, but maybe there's a way to bridge that gap. You have a chance to understand your father, to confront him if you want. Confront him? Marcus replied incredulously. Why would I want to do that? Because it could help you find closure, Olivia urged. You deserve to know the truth, to understand the man who is a part of you. whether you like it or not. As the room fell into an uneasy silence, Marcus's heart raced. He felt torn between the desire to protect himself from further pain and the yearning for answers that had eluded him for so long. Meanwhile, David sat alone in his office, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. The walls were adorned with photographs of his past, images of a life he had once cherished but now felt distant and foreign. He stared blankly at a newspaper article featuring Marcus's art exhibit, the words blurring before his eyes. With a heavy sigh, he leaned back in his chair, grappling with the loneliness that had seeped into every corner of his life. The regret was suffocating, a reminder of the choices he had made and the family he had abandoned. He had built a successful career, but in the quiet moments, he felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. David, he murmured to himself, the name feeling like a stranger's. What have you done? In that moment of introspection, he realized he had lost something precious, something that could never be replaced. The thought of Marcus, of the son he never got to know, consumed him. David had watched from a distance, a silent observer of the life he had chosen to forfeit, and now he was left with the haunting question of whether it was too late to make amends. As his mind raced with possibilities, the phone rang, interrupting his reverie. He picked it up, heart pounding, unsure of who might be on the other end. "Hello?" he answered, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "David?" a familiar voice said, and he felt a rush of emotions. Fear, hope, and a flicker of excitement. But before he could respond, the voice continued, "It's time for us to talk." David's heart sank, realizing that the past he had tried to escape was now rearing its head, demanding his attention. Unbeknownst to him, the threads of fate were weaving together, drawing Marcus. Sarah Marcus stood in the center of his studio, sunlight streaming through the large windows, illuminating the vibrant colors of his latest canvases. The walls, adorned with his art, created a tapestry of emotions that encapsulated the struggles and triumphs of his life. He had invited Olivia over, and as he prepared for her arrival, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbled within him. They had connected at the exhibit, and he found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't quite explain. When Olivia arrived, her presence felt warm and inviting, and Marcus offered her a tour of his creative space. "This is where I spend most of my time," he said, gesturing to the easels and scattered paint tubes. "It's my sanctuary." Olivia smiled, her eyes scanning the artwork. "It's beautiful, Marcus. I can feel the passion behind each piece." "Thanks," he replied, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. "Art has always been my way of expressing what I can't put into words. Each painting is like a chapter of my life." As they moved deeper into the studio, Olivia paused in front of a large canvas that depicted a stormy sea, waves crashing against a rocky shore. "What inspired this one?" He took a deep breath, his mind drifting back to the emotions that fueled the creation. "It represents the chaos of my childhood, the struggles, the uncertainty. But there's also beauty in the chaos, you know? I've learned to find strength in it." Olivia nodded thoughtfully, her gaze unwavering. "That's a powerful message. It resonates with me." "What about you?" he asked, genuinely curious. "What drives your passion?" Olivia hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. "I've been searching for someone, for a long time. I think it's important to understand where we come from to know where we're going." Marcus felt a pang of curiosity mixed with apprehension. "What do you mean by that?" Before she could respond, she shifted the conversation back to art. "Can I see what you're working on right now?" "Sure." He led her to a partially finished piece, a colorful abstract representation of a cityscape. "I'm still figuring it out. It's a bit chaotic, but I like it that way." Olivia studied the canvas, her brow furrowing slightly. "It feels alive, like it has a story waiting to unfold." "Exactly." He grinned, thrilled that she understood his vision. Art is all about the stories we tell, whether they're ours or someone else's. As they continued to discuss their artistic processes, Marcus felt an undeniable connection growing between them. It was as if they were dancing around unspoken truths, each word weaving a tighter bond. But he sensed there was something more beneath the surface of Olivia's words, a hidden layer that intrigued him. The conversation flowed easily, but as they shared laughter and ideas, Marcus could not shake the feeling that Olivia was holding back. "You've mentioned searching for someone," he finally said, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Is it someone important?" Her expression turned serious, and for a moment, the lightness in the room faded. "Yes, very important. It's complicated, though. It's about family, and, well, I've been trying to understand a part of my life that's been missing for a long time." Marcus frowned, sensing the weight of her words. "I get that. Family can be a complicated mess sometimes." Olivia looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. "Do you know much about your father?" He shook his head, the mention of his father stirring feelings he preferred to keep buried. "Not really, and honestly, I don't want to. He left when I was a baby, and I've never understood why." The air between them thickened, a silence stretching as Olivia processed his words. "You know, sometimes people leave for reasons we can't see. It doesn't mean they don't care." Marcus stared at her, a mixture of anger and sadness rising within him. "Is that supposed to make it better? He abandoned me. That's all I know." Olivia stepped closer, her voice softening. "I'm not trying to defend him. I know that sometimes people struggle with their own demons, and it affects their choices. It can be difficult to understand, especially when it hurts others." He looked away, frustration boiling under the surface. "It's easy for you to say that. You don't know what it's like to grow up without knowing your father. To feel that rejection." "You're right," she admitted. "I don't know what that feels like, but I do know what it's like to search for family, to long for connection. Sometimes, it leads us to unexpected places." As Marcus absorbed her words, he couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was more than just a stranger who admired his art. There was an unspoken connection threading between them, something deeper that he couldn't quite grasp. He felt compelled to ask, "What are you searching for, Olivia? Is it someone from your past?" She hesitated, her expression shifting as if considering how much to reveal. "Let's just say that family is a complicated thing for me too. I've been trying to piece together fragments of my past." Before he could probe further, Marcus's phone buzzed, breaking the tension in the room. He glanced at the screen and saw a notification from his mother. Curiosity piqued, he opened the message. As he read, a sense of dread washed over him. It was a letter from David, his father, addressed to Sarah. "What's wrong?" Olivia asked, noticing his sudden change in demeanor. Marcus's heart raced as he processed the contents of the letter. "It's from my dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He wants to reconnect with my mom. He regrets leaving." Olivia's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her expression shifting to one of concern. "Are you okay? That must be a lot to take in." "I don't know what to think," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "After all these years, why now? Why would he suddenly want to reach out?" Olivia took a moment to gather her thoughts. "You have every right to feel betrayed. But maybe this is an opportunity for closure. For you, for your mother." Marcus shook his head, his mind racing. "Closure? I don't want anything to do with him. He made his choice. But what if that choice wasn't as simple as it seems?" She pressed gently. "You deserve to know the truth, Marcus. Could change everything." He met her gaze, torn between anger and curiosity. "And what if it doesn't? What if it just opens old wounds?" Olivia stepped closer, her voice a soothing balm. "Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we need the most. It's okay to be scared, but you don't have to face this alone." Marcus looked down at the letter, the words swirling in his mind like a tempest. The idea of confronting his father felt monumental, but so did the possibility of understanding. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around them. "Maybe you're right," he finally said, his voice steadier. "But if I do this, I need to know everything. I need to understand why he left." Olivia nodded, her expression earnest. "And I'll be here for you, whatever you decide. You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope and determination. Even in the midst of uncertainty, he knew that he had the strength to confront his past. It was a daunting path, but with Olivia by his side, he felt less like a solitary figure lost in the chaos. As they stood together in his studio, the sun casting a warm glow on their entwined fates, Marcus realized that perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with the potential for healing, understanding, and the chance to reclaim the narrative of his life. The closing night of the art exhibit was a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation, a culmination of months of hard work and passion that Marcus had poured into each piece. The gallery buzzed with voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, the air thick with the scent of fresh paint and polished wood. It was not just any night. This was a night of recognition, a night where Marcus would finally receive the award he had dreamed of since he first picked up a paintbrush. Standing beside him was Olivia, her presence a calm counterpoint to the frenetic energy around them. Her eyes sparkled with pride, but there was something deeper, an emotion that danced just beneath the surface, an unspoken connection that Marcus couldn't quite place. He felt a sense of comfort in her presence, as if she understood him in a way that nobody else did. They had spent countless hours together in his studio, sharing stories and exploring the intricacies of art, but tonight felt different. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. "Are you ready for this?" Olivia asked, her voice soft yet firm, cutting through the din of chatter. She brushed a stray hair behind her ear, her gaze steady on him. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the thrill of the moment wash over him. "I think so. It's just, I never expected it to come to this. I mean, I've always worked in the shadows, you know?" Olivia smiled, her eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and encouragement. "You deserve this, Marcus. Your art speaks volumes. You have a voice that needs to be heard." As the clock neared 8, Marcus stepped onto the small stage at the front of the gallery, a spotlight bathing him in light, casting shadows of the crowd gathered to celebrate him. He looked out at the sea of faces, friends, fellow artists, critics, and the strangers who had come to appreciate his work. His heart raced, but he steadied himself. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice slightly trembling but growing stronger with each word. "This journey has been one of self-discovery and resilience. I've poured my soul into every piece, every stroke of the brush, and to be recognized for that is an honor I can hardly put into words." The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of support that washed over him. He scanned the room, locking eyes with Olivia, who beamed at him, her encouragement palpable. "Art is a reflection of who we are, and I hope that through my work, you see not just the colors and shapes but also the stories behind them. I want to thank my mother, Sarah, for being my rock and for teaching me the values of love and perseverance. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today." More applause followed, and as he continued to speak, he felt an overwhelming tide of emotions swell within him. He spoke of his inspirations, his struggles, and the importance of art in bridging divides and fostering understanding. But just as he was about to conclude his speech, an unexpected figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the tall, broad-shouldered man who had stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. David, his father, stood there, a look of uncertainty etched across his face. Gasps rippled through the audience as the murmurs began to circulate. Olivia's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and concern flickering across her features. Marcus felt a rush of emotions collide within him. Shock, anger, confusion. "Dad?" he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, caught between disbelief and a simmering rage. David took a step closer, his eyes searching for a connection that had been severed for 20 years. "Marcus," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't want to miss this moment. Why are you here?" Marcus interrupted, his heart pounding. "After all these years, why now?" The crowd fell silent, tension hanging thick in the air. David opened his mouth to respond, but before he could find the words, Olivia stepped forward, her demeanor shifting from supportive to assertive. "Marcus, Let him speak. There's something you both need to hear. David nodded, his expression softening as he turned to Olivia. You know who he is? I do, she replied, her voice steady. And I think it's time for you both to understand the truth. What truth? Marcus demanded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Olivia took a deep breath, her gaze shifting between the two men. Marcus, I'm David's half-sister. I've been searching for you for years. I wanted you to understand your father's story, the circumstances of his past that led to his departure. Marcus's brow furrowed as the revelation sank in. You're what? The words tumbled out, tinged with disbelief. David's eyes widened in realization, and he took another step forward, desperation evident in his voice. I never wanted to hurt you, Marcus. I was young, scared, and filled with prejudices I inherited. I thought leaving would protect you from my darkness, from the pain in my family. But I see now how wrong I was. As the truth began to unfurl, Marcus felt a whirlwind of emotions crash over him. Anger and betrayal battled with a deep-seated desire for understanding. So, you thought abandoning me was the answer? You thought that would protect me? I thought it was best for you, David replied, his voice trembling. But I was wrong. I was a coward. I ran away from my responsibilities, and I regret it every day. Watching you from a distance, I've seen the incredible man you've become. I felt proud, but I've also felt the crushing weight of shame. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as he processed the onslaught of emotions. How can I trust you now? You chose to walk away, to leave my mother and me alone. You made a choice. I know, David said, his voice breaking, and I'm here now hoping to make it right. I want to understand you, to learn about your life, to be part of it if you'll let me. Olivia stepped closer, her presence grounding them both. This is a chance for healing, Marcus. Your father, he's not just a stranger. He's part of your story, and acknowledging that could lead to something beautiful. For a moment, the gallery was silent, the weight of the moment significant. Marcus looked into David's eyes, searching for sincerity, for a glimpse of the father he had always longed for. I don't know what to say, he finally murmured, the vulnerability in his voice palpable. Part of me wants to scream, to push you away, but another part, it wants to understand. David nodded, hope flickering in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes, Marcus. I want to earn your trust, to be a part of your life, even if it's just a small piece. As the tension began to ebb, a tentative connection formed between father and son, a fragile thread woven from years of pain, loss, and unspoken words. The promise of reconciliation hung in the air, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. In that moment, amidst the applause and the stillness of the crowd, Marcus felt a shift within himself. The past, filled with shadows and regrets, began to feel less like a weight and more like a canvas, waiting to be painted anew. Let's start slow, Marcus finally said, his voice steadying. I'll give you a chance, but it won't be easy. Trust doesn't come overnight. David nodded, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over his features. I understand, and I'm willing to do the work. As the crowd erupted in applause once more, this time for the unexpected reunion, Marcus felt the warmth of possibility envelop him. The night was no longer just about the award. It was about beginnings, new beginnings that seemed to shimmer on the horizon, promising healing and connection forged in the fires of the past.